Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to the 5th anniversary celebration at the David Rumsey Map Center. We are delighted to have with us a very special guest, Dr. Josh Miele, who I will introduce in more detail later. Just a really quick bit of housekeeping. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. We'll get to those at the very end. So just hold on to those questions. We have next University Librarian Mike Keller say a few words of welcome. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Salim. Welcome to all of you. I'm delighted that so many are joining us for this 5th anniversary presentation and the presentation by Josh Miele on these maps, this hands-on mapping topic. What the DRMC, the David Rumsey Map Center, has accomplished in the past 5 years has been truly remarkable, and it's done so because of a terrific team of people and because of the constant attention and contributions in thought and direction from David and Abby Rumsey. The buzz locally, nationally, internationally of the David Rumsey Map Center has been amazing, very large. And more importantly, here at Stanford, the teaching and research that is inspired and generated has been a real accomplishment, the one that is more than satisfying. Many of you who are in this webinar with us have been with us as friends and supporters since we started to have meetings about what this concept would become. And you have invested in us and in the concept and the vision and the collection when it was first when it was just something on paper, some ideas, and then finally over time and with a lot of effort from a lot of people, it came into being. Because you're our founding friends and because you are also some of you new friends that are supporting us, I want to thank you and keep up the good work, and more wonderful accomplishments are in order and will be happening. Some of you and I have not yet met. Many of you have met with me, and I'm delighted that you're here with us. It is not the case that this David Rumsey Map Center just operates itself. There's a terrific curator and head of the David Rumsey Map Center in the person of Salim Mohammed, who has developed into a fine leader and a wonderful curator. And with him, his team consists of Andrea Renner, the assistant map librarian, who's been with us for some months, Ryun Wang, Brian Kramer, Tyler Mitchell, and lately with some support from the man who does so many good things for Stanford, the Stanford Library's Mike Knack. I want to send all of you folks my congratulations and my gratitude for your devotion to the David Rumsey Map Center. I mentioned David and Abby Rumsey, and there's so much to say. I haven't said all of it, and I will look forward to saying more of it over time. But these are our colleagues. They are fellow travelers in our vocation, and they are truly committed, and it's more than participation. It's a constant conversation. It's totally wonderful. Their commitment and their passion for making this David Rumsey Map Center such an important force at Stanford and for cartography studies at large around the world can hardly be overemphasized. They have demonstrated to everybody on campus the strength of their convictions and their devotion to the trustees, the president of our university and our provost, and they have testified in effect to the possibilities and the actualities, the realities of what the David Rumsey Map Center has been supporting, inspiring, accomplishing. It is a jewel, not just in the library's crown, but in the university's crown. So 5 years have brought a number of really fantastic presentations and events. A lot of youngsters' lives have been touched. PhDs have selected topics they wouldn't have thought of without the help of the DRMC and its various donors. And I just want to congratulate all of you for these accomplishments and for the participation that you have given it. Josh Miele is a really interesting character, and he's doing very important work. And I'm delighted that he is here with us today. I'm going to turn now to David and Abby and let them speak. So thank you, David and Abby. Thank you all, David and Abby, for everything over these years. It's been a wonderful journey together. I look for many more years. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mike. We're just very, Abby and I are very humbled by the success of the Map Center. It was a dream that we had for a long time, as Mike said, and through the efforts of so many people, it's now become a reality and continually evolving. It's just amazing to us that in the 5 years, which it seems like yesterday that we opened, but when you think of everything that's happened, it really stretches out time. All of the lectures, exhibits, classes taught, hundreds of classes, publications, and use, particularly by undergraduates. We're so thrilled by that, and graduate students, and the general public, all really working with the maps and playing with the maps digitally, physically, in so many ways. Salim and his team that Mike mentioned have just done an outstanding job in making all these functions happen. We want to particularly remember the late TJ Cruzada, who helped us so much in the first 5 years of the center's life. Also, Mike's whole library team has just been fantastic in helping the center grow, fit into the library, and even more. As Mike said, since we've opened, even though we're only 5 years old, we've really become known nationally and internationally as a very special place for people to work with maps in so many forms. And even though we were closed for the past year, Salim and his team, given the digital nature of our holdings, has been able to really keep things alive, as is witnessed today, having this program virtually. I'm so looking forward to the next 5 years and even 10 as we add to the physical collections, add to the digital collections, and particularly refresh the whole technology at the center and move us even more into the 21st century. So, Abby?
Thank you very much, David. We are, as David said, really delighted at how quickly and deeply this vision for maps and the Map Center has become a reality. It does seem like an incredibly short 5 years, although there was a long run up to that opening. Through the center, we have expanded cartographic resources available to the faculty and students of Stanford, of course, but researchers far beyond the Bay Area as well. Beyond the resources, the center has also expanded the cartographic imagination of so many students and faculty. And that's, I think, the most important thing for us, because now we see people who are able to use maps as primary sources as fluently as they do text and audiovisual materials, if not more fluently, in fact, especially in the digital realm. Though I want to acknowledge that this has been a very difficult year with the loss of so many who matter in our lives, and this is compounded by the isolation experienced by all. We have been so deeply happy and moved by the center going all virtual and being able to see for the first time the true reach of the center, which is really global. We've noticed that through the expanded reach of our talks, that we have to accommodate many different time zones across the planet in order to make it accessible to people who really want to see the presentations. So I joined David in celebration and thanks to the many people at Stanford who've helped us make this possible, and in looking forward to many more years ahead of joy in maps. Thanks. Salim?
Thank you, Abby. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mike, for all of those kind words. It's taken the last 5 years have been absolutely fantastic, and I have prepared for you a short retrospective, which I will start now, just to give you a sense of what we've done in the last 5 years, and again, and what's to come. So we started on April 19, 2016, and today is 5 years and 5 days. But before I move on to the rest of the presentation, I want to dedicate this retrospective to DJ Cruzada, who passed away last year on August 23rd of last year. He was the center's first services supervisor, and as many of you have already mentioned, played a very important role in the first 5 years of the center. We miss him every day, and it's been a difficult year for that reason alone. So we opened April 19, 2016. Just some photographs from the opening. You can see the delight on people's faces. On the main, definitely the main co-conspirators over here, my friend David Rumsey. But I think the true impact is seen by the numbers. So we'll just let's just start with some numbers, and you can get a sense of what we've done in the last 5 years. So we've had 18,174 visitors. We've supported 91 classes, had 26 workshops, organized and hosted 5 conferences, supported 23 other conferences, created 15 spotlight exhibitions. We have 47 talks. We do about 1 a month, 9 physical exhibitions, and conducted about 123 tours. We have also received a lot of dignitaries from really across the world, and delighted that they could come to the center. As all of you have mentioned, particularly Abby and David, this last year was just a little bit different, and we did a lot of things via Zoom, including, of course, this presentation. And I thought I'd just bring out those statistics as well. We've had 3,056 visitors over Zoom. We've conducted 9 classes over the last year. 4 spotlights, these are our exhibits. We had to go all digital, so we have 2 digital-only exhibitions this past year. Really, it's our first digital-only foray. We conducted 9 workshops, and every Monday during term, we have office hours on Monday morning. So that has also been helpful. We've been having people drop in. We've also done some tours. And then again, as I mentioned earlier in the other section, 11 talks. We've made impacts in many different ways. I'll talk about classes very quickly. We've become really a conduit and an interdisciplinary cartographic commons. We've been conducting classes and supporting classes with the usual suspects, such as history and urban planning, all the way to theater and performance studies and anthropology. We run the gamut, and really the maps and the photography has brought everyone together. Some examples of some of those classes. There's Professor Karen Regan bringing in cartographer Molly Roy. This is mapping the world history class. We had, for example, Professor Attenbury, who teaches a class on the war in Afghanistan, and he decides to set up his first class at the center to be able to take advantage of the technology and the screens and being able to see the maps and actually the areas in Kabul, which they would study in more detail. We've had Professor Ross Stein, who teaches class on scientific presentation and public speaking using the backdrop of that volcano and teaching students how to speak to the press. We've done several conferences and symposiums, as many of you mentioned already. Some examples over here. We've got the Time and Space Conference that was in conjunction with the Humanities Center, the Mapping and Global Imaginary Conference, which is really a partnership between the Global History and Cultural Center of the University of Warwick, the Department of History, and the center. We've had several exhibitions, 9 in all, and one particular exhibition that I want to highlight here is the Coordinates exhibition, where we, the curators, David Rumsey and Emily Prince curated the exhibition, and we paired maps from the David Rumsey Map Center with artwork from around the world. In fact, it was the very first time where we brought in artwork, borrowed artwork from across the United States, and really was a new milestone for both the Green Library and for the libraries and the David Rumsey Map Center. We've had to move as to all digital this past year, and these are a couple of all digital examples of our exhibitions. We had the data visualization exhibition in September, and then more recently, Alexander Brown Hijazi, who is a PhD student here at Stanford, curated the Mapping the Islamic World exhibition. And both of these were some of the talks this year that were attended by people from all over the world, with registrations running up to 600, 700 folks at a time. We've also created several spotlights. You see some of them over here. From all of the events and the conferences and course talks like this came publications and keepsakes. We had catalogs. You see 2 of them over here with the Coordinates catalog, as well as the Urbana Monte catalog, the Time and Maps book that we launched from the center here. In fact, it was Conway and Carolyn Winter and Abby Rumsey who have launched the book. And all of this had tremendous support from David and Abby Rumsey. We've been creating keepsakes this year. In this world of pixels, we've been seeing the pixels, day in and day out. We felt like it would be important to make something that's physical, something that you can touch. Obviously, today's keepsake is a prime example of that. And so several of you have actually received a lot of these keepsakes, and some of you will receive today's keepsake, which we'll talk more about later on. We've been making acquisitions. David Rumsey, thankfully, has continued to make acquisitions, and we are benefiting from that. The Stanford the center always is also making acquisitions on a regular basis, but clearly I have to mention the Urbana Monte as really one of our extreme gems of the center that was unveiled at the Barry Lawrence Ruderman Conference, the first Barry Lawrence Ruderman Conference. And this is a 1587 map by Urbana Monte that, if you were to actualize in the author's eye, would turn into a 10 by 10 feet map that you see over here. I have to talk about technology, of course, given that the center is really at the intersection of technology and photography. We've done a revamp of the audio and the video capabilities at the center. And the result of that is we've been able to do many things, but one of them is being able to unveil a YouTube channel, which is rich with all of our talks, both with Zoom as well as the in-person recording. And this will grow, and all of these will end up in the Stanford Digital Repository. Much of what we do, we depend on, of course, not only the wonderful colleagues that I have here at libraries, but with program partnerships, friends and supporters. One of the two programs that we started the center with was the partnership with the Barry Lawrence Ruderman. He is an anti-map dealer, and we have a partnership with them where we do a conference every other year. The first one was just sort of a general conference. The second one was more of a survey of cutting edge mapping across the world. And the other one was on gender, sexuality, and photography. The other major partnership is with the California Map Society, where we have been able to do an annual student essay competition and an annual speaker series. We're going to continue our partnership with them. We're in talks with them about what the next 5 years would look like. I want to acknowledge our founding friends and supporters. I know Mike has mentioned David Rumsey. I cannot even begin to think how our friendship, our partnership of myself and my colleagues with David and Rumsey has been so amazing. And not only has David and I, contributed and are full partners both intellectually and financially, and we're grateful for that support. Our other founding friends, Glenn and Ellen Rothman, Bill and Yvonne Jacobson, Len and Juliet Rothman, the California Map Society, Paul and Jennifer Sappho, David and Maureen Jordan. Our founding supporters, Sharon and John Brown, Susan Coy, Warren Heckler, who has since passed away, Louis O'Neill, which in the last few years especially has become a major supporter of the center. Wells Fargo, Robert Gordon, who has also passed away, and then another major digital donor who's was also passed away, but his family chooses right now to remain anonymous. We've had several supporters since opening the center. Catherine McMillan, Fred DeJarle, Juan and Crispin Tava, Alicia and Dave Appel, Michael Karasik, and Bill Hayden. I want to give you a big thank you for all the support you have given the center and the library, and I'm looking forward to the day where we can meet again in person and where I can thank you in person. So that's the last 5 years. Just maybe a glimpse into what the next 5 years might look like. Some of the things that we're considering. We're considering a technology refresh. We don't know what that would look like exactly, but that is to come. It could be some different sense of 3D mapping, maybe virtual cave within the center. Perhaps it's just more high resolution screens. We're looking into that. We're looking into integrating maps into the curriculum versus AR and VR. We've got AR virtual reality sets, Oculus Rifts at the center, but we want to actually make it into a program, and we're working on how to make that happen. We will move from the California Map Society essays, essay competition, and the speaker series to a student curated competition where we're hoping to open it up to students all over the United States, considering that for the next 5 years. Our partnership with Barry Lawrence Ruderman will continue. Well, the next conference is in October of this year, 2021 this year. It is going to be on indigenous mapping, and it's going to be a completely online conference, so many of you can attend from the comfort of your home. We're also very soon, in the next year, we will be having a conference on remapping Sovereignty, representing geographic complexity in May 2022 with the Stanford History Department. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what's to come. And well, I'm going to stop the share. I have next the distinct pleasure of introducing our 5th anniversary speaker, Dr. Joshua Miele. Dr. Joshua Miele is a blind scientist, inventor, and community leader with decades of experience creating innovative accessibility solutions. In addition to tactile cartography, he has made contributions to mobile wayfinding tools, video description technologies, and accessible STEM education. He is currently a principal accessibility researcher, at Amazon and lives in Berkeley, California. In today's talk, Dr. Miele will use the creation of TMAP, Tactile Maps Automated Production, to frame the broader landscape of how tactile maps and graphics can be used by blind people to understand many kinds of spatial information. We will discuss the power of touch as a spatial percept, as well as the design constraints on tactile representations that are surprising and challenging to most visual designers. So without further ado, Dr. Joshua Miele.
Thank you so much, Salim. Really, it's humbling to be invited and to have the opportunity to speak to this group on such a great occasion. Great work over the last 5 years, and I'm very excited to see what's coming. Just a quick check-in. We've had some time shifts. What time should I shoot for ending my remarks? Salim or Andrea, if you want to just speak up and let me know, that would be very helpful.
Yes, Josh, we have time for about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Okay,
great. First of all, this is, I am here today. I've been billed as a tactile cartographer. I wear many, many hats. And so my primary role is as an information accessibility researcher, inventor, designer. When Salim introduced me, he used the word blind. He called me a blind inventor and scientist. Those were my words. And I put blind first because blindness is really, it's, like so many other identities. That's who I am. That's, it shapes and as it were, colors all of the work that I do. And I'm quite proud to be a blind scientist and inventor. And really want to, I often joke that I lead a blind first existence. I'm not trying to hide it behind anything. And so I'm very very upfront about that. And I've been blind for a super long time. And what I'm going to do today in my comments is kind of try to be as linear as possible. By the way, I'm not using PowerPoint. If I were using PowerPoint, I'd be showing, silly pictures of me wearing lots of different hats, probably, because that's, what PowerPoint seems to be best at. It's not only a pain in the neck for me to create and author good PowerPoint, but I figure this is called a talk, and that's mostly what I'm going to do. So you don't need to pay too much attention to the screen over the next 40 minutes or so. It'll just be me, and I'll be being as descriptive as possible about the things that I'm talking about. So one of the hats that I wear is a tactile cartographer, and I was, that's a hat that is not really mine to put on, but it's such an honor to be labeled as such by the folks at the David Rumsey Map Center. And indeed, my history with tactile maps is pretty significant. I've done a lot of really fun and very rewarding work in the area of tactile maps, and I'll try to talk about tactile maps, and I'll do it. I'm going to talk about my childhood a little bit and what kind of tactile materials I had growing up. I'll talk about my education and how I use tactile materials there. Then I'll discuss TMAP, the Tactile Maps Automated Production, and all of the work that went into that and where it went, and really kind of use that as a backdrop for helping folks understand what it is about maps that blind people need and want. So I'll try to be as linear as possible as I go through these things, and hopefully I'll be mostly interpretable. So I live in Berkeley, but I was born in Brooklyn, and I grew up on the East Coast. I went to high school there. And in growing up, I was lucky enough as a blind kid to have a mother who was an artist, and her medium was collage. Her favorite medium was collage. She also did sculpture. She did a lot of work with paper and fabrics. And so there were always a lot of materials around to make tactile art out of, and tactile, what sort of were my childish tactile graphics and representations of things. And maps were certainly among the things that I wanted to create. And I was also, my father is also is an architect. And so there were lots of materials around for building models and opportunities to think about spatial layouts and talk about spatial layouts. And so I really had a very rich tactile and spatial childhood. I was also lucky enough to have in school resources that allowed me to have everything that I needed in Braille and everything that I needed to be drawn in tactile graphics. So I was able to, when I took geometry, I had access to the tactile graphics that illustrated the geometry concepts. When I took calculus, I had access to those materials as well. And this really gets to one of the fundamental things that I think needs to be understood by people who aren't blind. And that is that a lot of the time when we look at materials, we look at maps, we look at graphics or infographics of many kinds, and we say, oh, that's very visual. And what we usually mean by that is that it's spatial. A spatial representation is, I probably don't need to explain too much for this group, but a spatial representation is something that provides information and context in the relationship of different pieces of the graphic or information to one another. And so you can do that visually. Vision is really great for doing that because vision is a very powerful spatial percept. But it's not the only one we have, right? We can also use our ears for spatial hearing. That's what I did my PhD is actually in something called psychoacoustics, which is how hearing works. And my focus was on how spatial hearing works. How do you know where something is when you hear it? When you say, oh, I heard a thing over to the left, how do you know that? And so that's what I spent 5 or 6 years of my life studying. And vision is great. And so the other really powerful spatial percept that we have is touch. And touch is an incredibly powerful tool for understanding spatial relationships. And obviously, in addition to location, you can use touch to identify textures and all of the other sort of aspects of touch. If you're layering things, you can feel how high the layers are, and different materials have different, not just textures, but different resistances as you press on them, and so on. So touch is really a very powerful thing, and blind people are just, there's no reason why blind people can't or shouldn't have really great spatial information. But so often we think that information that is presented spatially is visual, that we don't really try to render it into a form that can be appreciated and perceived by touch. So that's really one of the areas where I've spent a great deal of effort in my research and development, is looking at how to use touch and hearing to get spatial information. Spatial information is one of these things that's sort of pervasive. Maps are just one of the flavors of spatial information that I love and am committed to. I've worked, I mentioned my PhD. I also have an undergraduate degree in physics. It's from Berkeley, but you Stanford people can, I'm sure you can get past that. The idea of having tactile graphics in learning about science and math and engineering is indispensable. So a lot of my interest is in how to help blind folks get better access to the information they need in order to get access to education, employment, and entertainment in the ways that they want. I'll give you a couple of other examples of the types of spatial information that I've created and worked on. One was when I started my career in accessibility, I was working at a company called Berkeley Systems. Some of you may or may not remember the fish tanks that were used as screensavers on the early Macintosh and early Windows computers. Those screensavers were made by a company called Berkeley Systems, which also produced the very first screen readers for the Mac. The first screen reader that was available to consumers was on the Mac, and it was I was part of the team that created it. I was just doing tech support and documentation, but part of the documentation that I created for the product that we soon released on early Windows computers was a set of tactile graphics that illustrated the screens that you would normally have, because blind people, not only did we need to teach them how to use the screen reader. By the way, a screen reader is a piece of software that blind people use to just interact with standard off-the-shelf computers. So it's indispensable for getting anything done these days. But we needed to teach people about the paradigm of the GUI. We needed to teach people what windows were, what menus were, and what dialog boxes were, what buttons looked like, and what list boxes looked like. And so I created a set of tactile graphics that were part of the documentation for this screen reader, and they were extremely powerful in teaching people about the visual paradigm that they needed to understand in order to interact with these computers. So that's just, that's in a sense, they were maps, but they were not maps of geography. They were maps of computer screens. And in fact, really what they were was just tactile wireframes of graphical elements. I also worked briefly as an intern at NASA. I was doing some work on the ill-fated Mars Explorer mission, and one of the things that I needed to do, we were working on a spectrometer instrument that was aboard that spacecraft, and so I needed to be able to look at spectra. And so I had a Braille embosser, which was basically a computer-driven printer that could produce Braille instead of print, and it could produce tactile graphics as well. The tactile graphics are, you can think of them sort of like just a very tightly spaced dots on the paper that like a dot matrix image. But for touch representation, it was really great. And that's still how we do a lot of our tactile graphics, by the way. So there I was able to, for my own purposes, produce a tool that could print out spectrographs, and be able to show the frequency as a function of time. So so I also, when I mentioned earlier that I went to grad school, and I was in a lab where we were studying hearing, and there were all kinds of visualizations that my fellow students were working on. They would crunch their data and print it out in all kinds of cool ways and display it and interact with it. And I didn't have any ways of doing that. There were no good tools. We were using MATLAB, and MATLAB, for those of you who don't know, is sort of like Excel on steroids. It's a very powerful number crunching environment that really relies on matrix math to do a lot of number crunching. And we did all of our experiments. We ran all of our experiments using MATLAB. We did all of our number crunching in MATLAB, and we generated all of our sounds in MATLAB. And my fellow sighted grad students produced all of their visualizations in MATLAB as well. I couldn't do that, and was at a significant disadvantage. So I had to spend the first couple of semesters writing software for myself that would take MATLAB data and turn it into, like my spectrograms, turn it into data that I could print out on a Braille embosser. So I wrote a whole bunch of very cool MATLAB tools that would interact not only with a Braille embosser, but that could also do sonification, that could use the computer's sound to represent data. So I wouldn't have to print it out every time. If it was simple data, I could just listen to it. And actually that toolkit that I used, that I created in grad school, became the basis for the TMAP project. So after I finished graduate school, I started a postdoc at the Smith Kettlewell Eye Research Institute, which is a great research institute in San Francisco. In addition to working on vision and vision science and visual eye diseases, they do really cool work on accessibility and tools for blind and visually impaired people, particularly tools that give access for scientists and engineers to the data they need in order to work as scientists or engineers. So this was a great postdoc. And my first project, the first thing I really leaned into there was the TMAP project. Before I talk too much about TMAP, I want to talk a little bit about the social aspects of blindness. I mentioned, how lucky I was to develop tactile literacy as a kid, how lucky I was to have access to all of these tactile materials. That's not common. Not everyone has those privileges. And it's many schools don't have the resources to devote to creating tactile graphics and Braille. Many kids don't have artists and architects for parents, and many kids don't have the kind of support that I did. A lot of kids are told, don't touch that. You know, when you can't see something, the best way to interact with it is to touch it. And so often I've heard parents telling blind kids, oh, don't touch that. And that's really sad, because parents should be encouraging their kids to interact with things by touching them. And of course, you need to be respectful and appropriate about touching. But if you don't touch, you won't know. And if you don't explore your world, you will grow up to be someone who's afraid of exploring. And being afraid of exploring is not a recipe for success. So, and COVID, of course, has really set us back in terms of tactile sort of being cool with touching things. Now we have other reasons to worry about touching things. But nevertheless, blind people must continue to touch things in order to work with them. So we need to figure out not only the social aspects of this, but all of these sort of larger societal issues like resourcing and education of both parents and children to know that that touching is okay, and of materials. And of course, when I started my TMAP project, it was because it was really hard to get hold of any kind of decent tactile maps. And I grew up loving maps. Anytime I could get a hold of a tactile map, I would spend hours with it. I would look at it, I would ask questions about it, I would explore it and think about what it was like to be in that place. I had a US, just off the shelf, nothing special for blind kids. I had a US puzzle map that was just cut, just a jigsaw wooden puzzle with each state being one piece. And so that's how I learned my US geography. And I was able to get hold of other maps, relief maps. I had some really great maps of that would show the mountain ranges in Alaska and in California, and a bunch of other really cool tactile maps. And but I always wanted more. I was not satisfied with these maps that I had. So really, my motivation in the TMAP project was I wanted people to have access not just to maps of the United States that anybody could sort of produce, but maps of their own neighborhoods, maps that would help them get from one place to another, maps that would be useful to them, not only in building spatial cognition skills, but also in getting from home to work, getting from school to your house, getting to your friend's house, going to the store, doing the things that people need to do. And so one of the reasons why there was such a dearth of tactile maps is that there was some research done in the 60s, the 1950s and 60s, that showed that blind people really couldn't use tactile maps, that showed that blind people weren't able to integrate the information, and that in fact the only way blind people could really learn their way around was by being given a linear route from one place to another. Go one block, turn right, cross 3 streets, turn left, that sort of thing, which is very useful for memorizing how to get from one place to another, but does not really help you build a spatial representation of a neighborhood where you live or where you work or where you want to wander around. And so it was pretty obvious to me that this research was deeply flawed, because I knew I could use maps. I knew that my blind friends could use maps, and I spent a bunch of time at Smith Kettlewell trying to encourage other researchers and collaborations that would sort of break this idea in the scientific or in the in the blindness education community that blind people could not use maps. And part of my plan for TMAP was to make it so easy and cheap for people to get hold of tactile maps of their neighborhoods that they would not only be using them, but they would be showing them to each other and building on them and working with them in order to, why mess with the scientific establishment when you can just de facto go to the community and say, here's a tool that you can use. So that was my sort of plan when I set out to build TMAP. So blind people can use tactile maps to build mental models of their environments, and it's been shown now by many researchers, and is very obvious to me and other blind people who work in this field that spatial information in the form of maps is very, very helpful for blind people. Not all blind people, just as some sighted people have trouble with maps, some blind people also have trouble with maps. But by and large, there's nothing inherent about being blind that prevents you from integrating spatial information about your environment through a tactile map. The TMAP project, which I started during my postdoc, this was in 2003, 2004, up through 2007, I was developing the prototype of TMAP. And I'm going to talk now about some of the design constraints and requirements for tactile maps and how blind people do use tactile maps. For one thing, I want to make it clear that a tactile map is not the best tool for a blind person to say, I'm lost. How do I find my way out of this? It's not, I would not advise any blind person to stand on a street corner with a tactile map and try to figure out how to get home. Tactile maps are at their best being used by blind people when they're being used to build mental models, when they're being used to help someone build a cognitive map of a place that they either have traveled or are going to travel, or frequently get lost in, or whatever. So it helps you, if you have a functioning mental model of an area, then you can use that in real time as you're going from place to place in order to understand where you are on that map. And so really tactile maps are great for route planning or for understanding how a street network connects, or understanding the layout of an intersection so that when you cross the street, you know where you're going, etc. So that's where tactile maps really shine for blind users. And the design constraints are interesting because they're quite different from what you would use for a visual map. A lot of people have this idea that you can just take a visual map and turn it into something that you can touch and have that be something that a blind person can use. Nothing could be further from the truth. Visual maps are generally extremely detailed and have a lot of information, a lot of different types of information. They use color, they use line width, they use line type, they use visual texturing, and they've got print labels all over the place. And that's great when you can, when you have sight, because you can take a closer look at the things that you want to understand better. And visual filtering is much more adept than tactile filtering. So for tactile maps, one of the most important things is that the maps be as simple. And when I say simple, I don't mean simplified, but I mean uncluttered as possible. That they need to be very clean and concise. And really, you can use symbols on a map, but you really can't have very many different symbol types because tactilely they start to get undistinguishable very quickly when they're at a size that's small enough to fit a meaningful number of abstraction symbols onto a map. So so they need to be extremely clean in design. And of course, they also need to be available. If you don't have access to the map, it's not going to do you any good. So it needs to be inexpensive and easy to produce with the materials that you have at hand. And of course, they also need to be, because you're using your hands and arms to explore a tactile map, you need to think about ergonomics. Very often, it's an instinct to put a tactile map on a wall, maybe at face height, which is where you would put a visual map for people to be able to see it. But it's really quite difficult to find an ergonomically appropriate wall position for a map, because people have different heights, people have different arm lengths, and it's exhausting to hold your arms up like this for very long. So maps on walls are really a problem. So it was piling all these, and then labeling. Labeling is a really interesting problem on maps, because, as I mentioned, clutter is really the enemy. And labeling, the more labels you have on a map, the more clutter you're introducing. And you need to label things in order for them to be, to identify them. But the more, Braille takes up quite a bit of space. And so Braille labeling is a real challenge. And so I'll talk about some of the other solutions in a second. So rolling all those together, it became clear that the way to do good mapping was to make it distributable over the internet digitally, so that people could emboss their own onto paper, a nice cheap medium, and to design them as cleanly and as concisely, with as little clutter as possible. They needed to be automated. There needed to be no human intervention whatsoever, because as soon as there's a human factor, that raises the cost and slows things down. So they had to be completely computer generated. And of course, the labeling is a real, for automation, automated labeling is a very hard problem. And so I basically came up with a design that would be, that would meet all of these requirements. And by the way, one of the other things is that when a blind person sees a map that's been created by hand by a cartographer, let's say I don't know what the right term is for maps that are sort of boutique and created for a particular purpose, but these whenever different cartographers would have different styles and would have different methods of representing objects, and different line types would mean different things. I wanted every map to be the same in terms of style. I wanted, once you understood that a line was a street, and that a marker represented the center, the center of the map, and that the labels were 3-letter abbreviations that were included, expanded out in a legend. Once you understood all those things, every map was the same. And so rather than spending the first 10 minutes of looking at every boutique map to figure out what the cartographer meant, once you understood one of my maps, you could understand all of them. And that was a real, really important to me, because I felt like standardization is one of the key requirements for people to be able to understand things quickly and easily with as little cognitive friction as possible. So, so the TMAP system that I created, I used MATLAB as the back end for it. I also, sorry, I'm just distracted there for a second. So the maps that I started producing at Smith Kettlewell as part of this project in about 2005 were the first maps. Then I created a web interface so that anybody could go to a website and create the maps themselves and download the files. And if they had an embosser, they could print them out. But it still was a little iffy because so many people didn't know how to use their Braille embossers, and so many people didn't know there were some technical sharp edges that made it hard for people to do. So I was very tentative about sharing this website because I didn't have the time or the energy to help people to do technical support for this website that I had created. But I partnered with the San Francisco Lighthouse, which is an organization that supports blind and visually impaired people in San Francisco and all up and down the West Coast in many ways. And so I, as a scientist at Smith Kettlewell, I said, hey, what if you have this service? What if I give you this website so that you can use it and you can produce maps for your clients and they can then have access to it. And so that's what we did for many years. And there was another partnership around the same time. I mentioned how labeling is really a problem. And I'm sure that many of you have been thinking about this as I've been talking, but one of the greatest ways to add annotations to a tactile map is to make it interactive, make it so that when you touch the map, or so that you can do particular gestures on the tactile map that will make it talk. And so I partnered with a company called Touch Graphics, my very valued friend Steve Landau, who's a genius of tactile design, to create audio tactile materials that were based on TMAP, so that you could touch the TMAPs. We used a touch screen, we used a computer, and basically you could put a TMAP onto a touch screen and then touch the map itself, and the touch screen behind that map would then receive the tactile input and would be able to give you labeling information about that street. So by doing stuff like that, you can add all sorts of annotation information to a tactile map. I'm just being conscious of time here, so I think I'm still got a few minutes left. I want to just say that I did one of the things that I did that was sort of so interesting about this project was I really rolled my own GIS. I wasn't using Esri. I wasn't using any developed GIS because there was really nothing available for somebody like me to use, and it would have been extremely expensive. So I used Tiger Line data from the census. I used other free data sources, and I programmed it all in MATLAB, and it was janky. It worked, but it kind of it rattled a lot as it worked. And so one of the great things that happened around 2014 was that I got a grant to rewrite MATLAB. Oh, sorry, to rewrite TMAP. And at the same time, I doubled down on my partnership with the San Francisco Lighthouse and said, here, why don't you guys take this over? So the San Francisco Lighthouse is now the stewards of TMAP, and they also do a lot of really cool other tactile cartography and tactile representation stuff. One of the other projects that I worked on with the Lighthouse was a book of BART station maps. BART is the Bay Area Rapid Transit, and one of the problems that blind people have in getting from place to place is being able to figure out their way around inside train stations and other transit facilities. So we created a book that had maps of the layouts of the stations and the geography around the stations that included things like where the bus stops were, where the bus stops are, where the fare gates are, where the ticket machines are, even down to where the benches are and where the train doors open on the platform, so that you could actually plan your entire route through the BART system using this system. I think, you know, there's a theme here, right? And the theme is that access to information, and in my case, access to spatial information and maps, is a key to blind people's ability to participate as equals. It's key to being able to get around independently, and to be able to operate on equal footing with your sighted friends, peers, colleagues, etc. So really, this is all part of disability inclusion. One of the hats that I wear is as an accessibility and disability advocate and sort of promoter of the concept of equal inclusion through good accessibility. And that's really one of the main things that I wanted these T-maps to do. Was I wanted them to be interesting and exciting and cool, not just useful for blind people, but attractive and interesting for sighted people. Because part of what we're doing here is to move the needle on inclusion of blind people in every part of life. So often we have preconceptions, ideas about what blind people can and can't do, and altogether, too often those impressions are informed not by fact, but by assumption and prejudice and preconception. So really, this is an opportunity now for us to talk about spatial information and how we use spatial information to sort of level the playing field. There are education gaps, there are information gaps, there are employment gaps, there are income gaps, and really what I'm trying to do in all my work through creating new tools and accessibility is to close those gaps. And so I want to sort of acknowledge that the David Rumsey Map Center is also helping to close those gaps by being open to the idea of including a tactile cartographer as the keynote speaker for the 5th anniversary. And of course, you know, I humbly accept the hat as a tactile cartographer, but I have a great deal left to learn about cartography, and I look forward to working with the David Rumsey Map Center over the next 5 years to think more deeply about accessibility and design and what maps mean for people who can't see or who otherwise can't use maps. So I want to say thank you to Salim and to everyone else at the David Rumsey Map Center for the invitation to speak to you today. We're going to have time for some questions and comments, but I think first Salim has a couple of comments about the Keepsake that some of you may already have received.
Josh, thank you so very much for this absolutely fantastic talk. I think we are just at the tip of the surface of the iceberg in terms of what else we need to learn. I want to take this opportunity now to just say a couple of things about the Keepsake, just and actually show the Keepsake to everyone, and then Josh is going to take us on a little tour of the Keepsake. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share the map. So what you see in front of you is 2 pages of the map. The map itself on top. You can see the dots, and on the second page, which you see only partially, are the 3-letter codes and the key, which Josh talked about. So just to give you a little sense of the detail, here's another slide which shows you some of the details. So what you see on the left here is Green Library and the David Rumsey Map Center. The one that number 8 here is actually Science Library, and then a little detail of the key and listing of the rest of the libraries and the number associated with them. So I am going to now go back to the map. Josh, everybody is able now to look at the map itself. So it's over to you.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we won't talk about it too long because I want to have some time for questions. But so I want to point out some of the I mentioned some of the design constraints about the map that we had to think about in doing TMAP, and some of those constraints are relaxable sometimes. So what we've on this map, you'll see that we have 2 different line types, really. One is a dotted line and one is a solid line. And I know that to the eye, they all look dotted, but there's a loose dotted line and a tight dotted line. Let's put it that way. To the touch, the tightly dotted line feels almost solid. You can tell that it's made out of dots, but you can easily distinguish between that and the other line types. So there are only 2 line types on this map. The tightly dotted lines are roads and streets, and the loose ones are paths and pedestrian ways. And so this data, by the way, came from OpenStreetMap, not from the Tiger line data. So one of the things that happened in the TMAP rewrite when the Lighthouse took it over is that we took data directly from OpenStreetMap. We know that there are compromises associated with that, but it's a great ready-made source of data and points of interest. So I'll also point out that at the top right corner of this map, you'll find a horizontal line, and just above that horizontal line, it says 1,000 feet. So this is the automated scale on this map, and all TMAPs have this scale in the upper right corner. So you don't need to wonder where the scale is going to be. You can just look up there and figure it out right away. And so TMAPs can be produced at different scales. There's also an arrow that points north. That's also going to be in a standardized spot. So the title of this map is let's see, it's the Stanford Libraries. But this TMAP isn't really it's not a true TMAP, because actually we've done a bit of massaging by hand of this map to add in particular to add the libraries. So the libraries are indicated with markers. Most of the markers are solid and have a number adjacent to them. One of them is not solid. It's a hollow circle. And so that's readily distinguishable by touch. And so in the key, or in the legend, those numbers are translated into library names. Around the edges of the map are these three-letter abbreviations for street names, and that's all automated. The three-letter abbreviations are created from an algorithm that takes the street name and crunches it to make sure that it's unique in the set of names that are going to be represented on the map, and then associates them with the street. Now, because it's really hard to put in an automated way, it's really hard to put labels in the interior of a map that that really ensures that you've got the that it's clear that what the thing that's being labeled and the label are clearly associated. So I never we never figured out how we could label interior streets. Maybe someday, using AI or some kind of deep learning mechanism, we can figure out how to really clearly and unambiguously label streets by putting the labels in the interior. But until then, we have to put them around the exterior. And even then, we have some ambiguity. So you'll notice that some of these labels have two streets that actually sort of point to the label. And one of the ways that we disambiguate that is that on the legend, not only do we tell you what the street name actually is, but we also tell you the direction of that street. So if that street is going from northwest to southeast, we annotate that in the legend so that you can look at the label and look at the streets that touch that label. And if there's any ambiguity, the legend will clarify which street has that actual name. There's a bunch of other stuff at the bottom of the map. It tells you that the lighthouse produced it using TMAP, and I think another really cool thing to point out about this map is that it's produced. It's not just the tactile map; it's a tactile and visual map, which uses a special printing process to emboss and inkjet onto the same piece of paper at the same time. So that really it's really great for blind and sighted people to be able to look at a map together and talk about it, and so that a sighted person can give directions relative to a map, or a blind person can give a sighted person directions relative to a map. And also, of course, not all blind people are completely blind. The vast majority of people who identify as blind actually have some vision. And so we want people to be able to use whatever medium works best for them. Very often, even people who can see reasonably well also benefit from being able to touch and confirm what they're seeing. I think I'll tie it up there with my comments about this map. I hope that the folks that receive it really enjoy it, and of course, if you are excited about tactile maps, you can get in touch with the San Francisco Lighthouse and find out all about their library of tactile maps that you can purchase from, or if you want them to help you create a custom tactile map, they can do that too.
Josh, thank you for that explanation and the tour. I have a couple things. One is I think when we were speaking with the Lighthouse team, there was something about what is for us sighted folks the second page, which is the key, is actually, I believe, the one that's first read by non-sighted people. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's it's a matter of taste, I think. I always look at the graphics first. Okay. I always want to explore the map or the graphic or whatever it is first to understand what the layout is, and then I'll look at the textual stuff that comes along with it. But I'd rather explore the graphics first.
Okay, great. I know this is Josh's brainchild, and it's magnificent. But I also very quickly want to thank the Lighthouse team, particularly, Maritza Calderon, BJ Epstein, Greg Carrot. They worked with us at the center to make this happen. So appreciate that very, very much. I'm going to stop
Naomi.
And Naomi too, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. Let me stop the share, and will this go on to Q&A? Good. Okay, We have lots of questions. I'm going to start from the beginning over here. David Weaver asks if you knew the work of Reg Gollage.
Oh yeah, Reg. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, he was just saying he was geographer at USB and he went blind. UCSB, I'm sorry, in the 1970s and 80s. He went blind during this period and did a lot of work on personal navigation. That's just a comment. So
yes, I want to say some things about Reg. Reg College was a great supporter of my work. He was extremely helpful in not only in sort of giving me feedback about what I was doing, but also just it's great to have blind mentors in a field when there's people that have sort of worked before you. We all understand about the concept of standing on the shoulders of giants, and Reg really was amazing, and he loved what I was doing with TMAP. He thought it was really cool, and I always very much appreciated what he did and built on a great deal of what he did. I was talking earlier in the pre-talk session about using GPS for wayfinding, and Reg and also Jack Loomis were and Barbara Latovsky were all super way ahead of their time with that stuff, and I leveraged all of their work a great deal of their work to build the GPS tools that I've been able to put out there.
Thanks, Josh. Tina Wassam asks, does using texture, for example, different fabrics and papers to indicate areas, do they work? She says she's a geology professor and she's trying to make maps and diagrams useful.
Yeah, it does work. And of course, different people have different tactile abilities. Not everyone, there's a thing that we call tactile literacy, right? And tactile literacy is sort of self-explanatory. You need to learn how to use your hands to explore. And as you do it, you become better at it. And so those kids that were told not to touch are at a disadvantage because they haven't been using, tactile exploration their whole lives. But different textures are definitely useful, and probably you don't want to use too many different textures to represent different things, but I would say probably, you can certainly use a few textures on a single map. One of the simplest ways to do this kind of collage is by using sandpaper. Sandpaper is really great for tactile representation and collage. But you can also, of course, use fabrics or different types of papers, different handmade papers, different matte or gloss levels, and just the main thing is to make sure that they are very distinct from one another. You don't want to use ones that are like even slightly similar, because you don't want to make your reader have to scrutinize the difference between two things to know which one is which. You want it to be immediately obvious. So yeah. Texture is extremely useful.
Thanks, Josh. Doug Wilder has a number of questions. I'm going to try and encapsulate them. They're all together. He asks, what about 3D maps for such as a mountain trail?
Mm-hmm.
3D printers being used to develop landscape maps that allow people to build a mental spatial model by touch. How is scale of a map communicated by touch? I think there are some other questions, but those two would be good to
sure
answer. Yeah,
sure. So the scale of a map is communicated by touch by creating any particular object that is of a known size. So, for example, if you represent a fountain on a map, and people know how big the fountain is, then that sets the scale. On TMAP, of course, we have a specific scale indicator where we put a line, and that line is then labeled with how long that line is. That's, I think, a fairly common practice, not just in tactile maps. And you can do the same thing on 3D printed maps. The real problem with 3D printed maps is that 3D printing is super slow, and it's also, if you've got a printer at home, you can probably print a 6-inch square map. If you've got a really fancy 3D printer, you might be able to print a foot square map. But most relief maps you would want to be larger than that. I think the other part of the problem there is it's really hard to annotate 3D printed maps. They're cool. They're don't get me wrong, they're wonderful. But I think that the best way to annotate maps like that, it wouldn't be with tactile markings. It would be with some sort of interactive computer approach, such as I worked on at Smith Kettlewell with my colleagues James Coughlin and others. We did a thing called Cameo, camera input output, which would basically use cameras to watch your hands as you explore a 3D object, and you could associate spoken annotations with different parts of that object. So you could do that with 3D printing. You can also use, milling is also very frequently used for CNC milling is also used for creating 3D relief maps, and also laser printing is great. If you've got a laser cutter, you can etch very nicely with laser cutters. And so one thing that you can do is you can actually create maps using different textures from etching. One problem with using laser cutters for creating 3D maps is that cutting into something, let's say if you create a line by cutting into something, that's nowhere near as tactily salient as a raised line. A raised line is much easier to follow and to detect than an etched line. So one thing that you can do is create a negative image with laser printing. Sorry, I keep saying that, laser cutting. You can create a negative image with textures and etchings of lines for roads and paths and other boundaries and stuff like that. And then you can use vacuum forming or some other molding process to create a positive image from that etched negative. And that's definitely a cool approach also. Again, something that not everybody has access to, but a great technique if you want to create materials that are sort of large scale and that you have some resources to put into.
Thanks, Josh. I just want to mention that we've got lots of questions. I want to make sure people know that we may not be able to get to all of them, but I'm going to pick it's already about, we're getting close to the time when we want to close the talk, but certainly we'll add a few more and take it from there. The next question is from Mason Waller, and it's also a bit of a comment. He says, really appreciate this talk. Thank you. I think despite being sighted, I'm also very tactile and would do well to develop this in perception. I'm an actor, so things like mental models and cognitive maps are really active in this work. I am also a teacher, elementary and middle school primarily. So I have a question about not just accessibility, but something other than specialization for inclusion. If you're familiar with UDL, Universal Design for Learning, okay, that's in this realm. What then do you think about possibilities to not just create specialized tools, but also educational tools and possibilities that lots of people can share and that satisfy our desires and needs for equity and access? Any recommendations to help people with more experience and facility in perceiving spatiality through sight develop this capacity in touch? Thanks, and grateful for the talk. So
it's a great question, and it's a great set of great set of interests and motivations. I think that one of the major so UDL is one of the sort of principles of universal design for learning is to allow people to experience things in different modalities, different ways of interacting with things, different ways of experiencing things, different ways of learning things, and I think it's just we call it UDL. I call it it's kind of common sense. The more ways we have of interacting with informational material, the more likely it is that we will understand it and integrate it. And it, of course, helps in lots of different ways, not just with kids with disabilities. So my main caution about UDL materials is that and sort of using touch and models in a UDL context is that they really need to be, we don't have a lot of good science behind it. We don't really understand yet what aspects of touch are critical. So we don't know, for example, if a 3D printed brontosaurus jaw, or maybe that's a bad example. Let's say a 3D printed flower, right? We don't know if that's going to be the same, if that's going to have the same impact as a real flower, because the real flower has very different tactile properties than the plastic that you would print it out with. And similarly, we need to be very careful that the tactile detail that we add to tactile materials is salient. Just because it's on the digital model doesn't mean it's going to be well represented on the tactile model. Something may be too small to really touch. Something may be too fragile to once you print it out, there may be a feature that breaks off when the first kid touches it. So these things not only need to be accurate in a lot of different ways that we don't necessarily know about yet, but they also need to be resilient to lots of handling. And I guess my last thing is, like, I want to make sure not to shortchange the blind kids. Tactile materials, blind kids have needs around tactile materials that not everybody else does. And so one concern I have about thinking about tactiles in the context of UDL is that compromises would be made to make materials more generally useful and less specifically useful for blind kids. And so, and that's not to say that I don't want other kids to learn, but I do have my biases, and I want to make sure that blind kids have the opportunity to be included in STEM and science education. And so I don't think that UDL and blindness accessibility are at odds, but it does take careful thinking to make sure that they coexist nicely.
Thank you, Josh. We have time for just a few more questions, maybe a couple. This one is from Peter Cracknell. Hi, Josh. How important is it for perception to use? How important is it to use two hands to read maps? Do you need an anchor point for spatial awareness?
That's a great question. So my colleague, Val Morash, Morash, did some great work. I was privileged to collaborate with her on a number of papers that we published in Perception about hands, number of hands and fingers in tactile exploration. And one of these research, one of these pieces of bad science from the 50s and 60s said blind people only use one finger to explore a map. And of course, that's not true. We use multiple fingers, we use multiple hands, and so Val did this incredible, beautifully counterbalanced and incredibly rigorous research to show that not only do blind people use multiple hands and multiple fingers, but that as you add fingers and hands, your ability to integrate information and effectively explore increases, not linearly, but it does increase. And she also showed that that blind people are better at it than sighted people, and that probably that she didn't. This wasn't part of the research, but that probably comes from experience, not from just being blind.
Great, thank you. What are your thoughts on parks designing tactile maps to help blind people get a better idea of what a park looks like?
Of what a park looks like. So I'm gonna reframe that question. I think that a tactile map of a park to help a blind person enjoy the park is a great idea. There are lots of maps of parks. One of the things that the Lighthouse does is national parks maps. There are lots of I've been to many parks all over the world that had at their visitor center beautiful relief maps that could be explored of the park itself. They are wonderful. What a park looks like is not necessarily what the map needs to communicate. I think that what someplace looks like is probably best done through a description from a sighted person about what they see as they go around the park. But I'm going to assume that when you say looks like, that was just sort of a turn of phrase. But I think maps for not only getting around in a park, but also appreciating the scope of some larger national parks and all of the geographies that they may include. Tactile maps are amazing for that, because you're not gonna walk all over Yellowstone and figure out what's there. You need a map to know what's in Yellowstone, whether you can see or not.
All right. Josh, thank you for that. And I think I'm going to ask our last question kind of to help wrap things around. I know, and this is really, it's actually coming from me myself. I know that you were just like the professor at UCSB was, you were not always blind. You became blind, a little, when you were a kid. How has that affected your perception, your spatial perception? Because you used to be able to see, and now, yeah.
It's hard to say, since we can't do an A/B experiment on that.
Right.
Right. But I know many blind people who have been blind their whole lives, who have extraordinary spatial cognition skills. I also know, and I think mine are quite good. Like I feel like my, I'm a very spatial thinker. So I would identify as being an extremely spatial person. And I know many blind people who've been blind their whole lives, who also think of themselves as being extremely spatial, who are good with maps, who are good with tactile graphics. I also know many blind people who had vision, for some part of their lives, sometimes large parts of their lives, who are not so good with spatial cognition. So I think that probably as a very young child, being able to see is probably a big advantage as you sort of run and play and interact with the world. But I think that, most of it really comes back down to what I started out talking about, which is family and the support networks that you have. A blind kid that's encouraged to run and play and explore is not going to be at any spatial disadvantages over a sighted child that's encouraged to do those same things. Whereas a blind child who is discouraged from exploring and touching is definitely going to be at a disadvantage. So I think that it's not so much the visual experience as it is the experience that that plays into and contributes to a blind person's ability to think spatially and appreciate spatial materials.
Thank you, Josh, for that extended response. I think I want to now take another opportunity to thank you for coming and eliminating minds about this whole new experience for most of us here, I think. So, and at this point, we are towards the close of the event. I want to let people know that our next event is on May 21st. It's Laura Bliss. She's a journalist at Bloomberg City Lab. And she will talk about her new book based on City Lab's COVID Life mapping project, and where the readers were asked to create their own maps, showing their worlds, what their worlds would look like during the pandemic. So watch for that in the next newsletter, which will come out May 1st. So with that, I thank you all for coming, and we're on to the next 5 years. I would say thank you again.
Thank you so much, Salim.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was such a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it. And good luck with everything.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.